this video, we are going to see on how to connect to Microsoft SQL Server database using Node.Js. While there are many ways to connect to SQL Server, the top two most frequently used Node packages are Node.Sql directly from Microsoft and mssql. So let us take a quick look at both of these two from npm.js point of view. So let me go to npmjs.com and let us see the first uh, package, that is Node.Sql. So this is one of the packages which can be used to directly connect to Microsoft SQL Server database. So let us search for that one. And first of all, you can see it is directly from Microsoft. So which means as long as you have this one, you shouldn't be having any kind of problems. So let us open this. And the prerequisites are something very much problematic in order to have all of those particular features. So for example, of course, we need to have Node.Js no matter what, and there are a couple more other things which are essential in order to have this particular package to be running on your machine. So you need to have Node, zip, and Python, C++, and some others. So if you actually install all of these, then certainly we can say that is going to be Windows based development. So which means this Node.Sql will be working if and only if you deploy your Node.js application on Windows environment. So that is some kind of a drawback whenever you would like to use this one. However, if you would like to have the fullest potential of SQL Server to be used, then this is the way to go. There is one more package which is frequently used rather than this Microsoft one, which is mssql. This is from a third-party developer. So you can see this is an easy to use mssql database connector for Node.js. So the moment I open it, so you can see just last day itself there are 1,000 downloads, and there have been quite a few number of downloads every month or every week. So looks like this is going to be much more stable version in order to use SQL Server database connectivity apart from Microsoft whatever it has published. So it has got several samples here on how to work and how to connect to SQL Server using various ways, and at the same time how to use requests, connections, transactions, and everything, including how to call stored procs. All of that stuff is already available in the form of documentation. So we are not going to cover all of those in this session. However, we are just going to see on how to connect to the SQL Server and get a table of information. And there is one more important thing. This mssql behind the scenes can use other drivers in order to connect to SQL Server, which includes TDS, Microsoft driver itself, and Node.TDS. If nothing is configured behind the scenes, it uses TDS as the main SQL Server driver in order to connect to SQL Server database. But let us close this and start working on the things. Before you connect to SQL Server, there are a couple of configuration things we need to ensure that those are in place. The first thing is that the database should be always running, obviously. So let us quickly check the services.msc. So this is the instance I am going to connect to. Where is that? Okay, let me order by name. So this is the instance I am going to connect to in this session. So you can see SQL Server, and the instance name is SQL2K14, and make sure that this is started. So you can see this is running at the moment, so you can stop or restart, whatever you would like to do. And at the same time, this should also be on. SQL Server browser should be running, SQL Server 2K14 should be running, and it is better to have SQL Server agent to be running as well. So after making sure that all of these three are running, we should also ensure that the TCP/IP settings are in place. So you can go to SQL Server 2014 Configuration Manager, and once you open this, make sure that in the protocols for the instance you are using, you need to ensure that TCP/IP is always enabled. And of course all of these services are running here. So in this case we don't use integration services, but it is better to have this service to be always running. Apart from that, these two are must. So on top of that, we should always have the client protocols and everything else to be always running. So in this case, the client may not be necessary until and unless you go for Microsoft SQL Server thing, but the protocols for the server itself should have TCP/IP enabled. If for some reason this is disabled, and if you make it enabled, you have to restart your services. So if you change from disabled to enabled, it will not be taking place immediately. So those settings will be taking place if and only if again you restart all of your SQL Server services here. So make sure that you just right click here and restart, and right click here and restart if you happen to modify TCP/IP from disabled to enabled status. So that is pretty much whatever you might be really worrying about when you're connecting to SQL Server. Ensure that TCP/IP is enabled and ensure that the services are always on. So in this case, in order to make things simple, I am actually working with sample DB. So I just created a new database in this SQL2K14 instance. This is a very simple database which will have only 2 tables, and out of that the EMP table essentially will have 4 columns and 6 rows. So this is the table we are trying to retrieve using Node.Js application itself. Now that everything is available in place, so let us start with Visual Studio and start creating a new application from the scratch. So new project, make sure that you have JavaScript, Node.js and blank Node.js console application. So in this case I would like to say sample SQL connection application, whatever you would like to call it as. So I just press OK. Okay, so we have this console.log, so we don't need this stuff. So the first thing, as I mentioned, I would like to use mssql package instead of using ms Node SQL. So right click your npm and say install new packages, and in this mssql is the one I would like to use. So you can see I select this install package, make sure that it is adding to package.json. I install it. Okay, that one got installed. Click close and you should be able to see mssql right there. So now that we have everything in place, now the first thing is that we need to have that particular module or the package to be imported. So I will be using mssql, so I require it, and this particular package, whatever you have imported, is going to be made available as part of SQL now. And in order to connect to SQL Server, we need to have certain kind of connection related parameters to be defined. For example, to which server you would like to connect, to which database you would like to connect, using what username, password, port number, and all of that stuff. So I would like to have all of those in a JavaScript object. So I would like to call the JavaScript object as dbconfig, and as part of that dbconfig I would like to say the first thing is that server, to which server I would like to connect to. So in this case I would like to say localhost SQL2K14. So you can also provide any kind of IP address here, like 127.0.0.1, which is nothing but the local system. But if your SQL Server is installed somewhere else, you can provide the IP address of that particular server, and this is the instance name. So I gave double slash here as because that is the escaping for the single slash. So in order to escape the single slash, I need to provide 2 slashes. So after providing the server, we need to provide the database to which you would like to connect to. In this case, the database name is sample DB. So I go in here and I am going to say sample DB. So once I have these two, I need to provide a username under which I would like to connect to. So in this case, as it is my local machine, SCA is my username, and the password in this case is SQL2014. And on top of that, the port number also you can provide, say 1433, which is nothing but the default port number I may have. So this is pretty much similar to connection string, which will be usually made available as part of ASP.NET or any other application in general. But usually, even from Node.js perspective, these are supposed to be read from some config or settings or something, which we are going to cover in next session. But for now, let us hardcode all of those details, and our goal is to get connected to SQL Server as soon as possible. And now, I would like to have a function called getEmp. So this is the function I would like to execute, and this function's responsibility is to connect to the SQL Server, execute a select statement, get all the results, and display on the console at the server itself. I'm not consuming this Node.js application at the moment. This is the application right now connects to SQL Server, fetches the information, and shows everything directly onto the console itself. So in order to execute this, all I'm going to say is getEmp at the end. So now we need to have our SQL Server connection to be made. So the first thing is that we need to have the connection object to be created, and as you know, all our mssql related package related instance is made available as part of SQL, and I'm going to use the same. And there exists a class called connection, and it will be accepting a particular configuration, and in this case our configuration is made available as part of dbconfig, so I can make use of that one. And at the same time, if you would like to have any kind of callback after connection has been made, or if you are having any errors or something of that sort, then we can also provide the callback here. So for now I don't want to provide anything. So the connection object is ready. So once the connection object is ready, I need to have the request object. Again, as I mentioned, this is just creating an instance of a connection, but you are not connected to the SQL Server yet. So you have not connected yet. In order to connect, you need to use connect method, which we are going to use in a bit. But for now, this particular statement, whatever you are going to see here, is not really connecting to the SQL Server database. It is just creating an instance in order to connect later on. So for now, it is not connecting. Now, similar to connection object, I would like to have a request object to be created, so which will also be available as part of SQL and using the same connection. So request object takes the connection object into the account, and it will try to request based on whatever the options we will be providing. Now, once we have connection instance and request instance created, now I can say connection dot connect. So now you can see I have that particular method which essentially tries to connect to the database right now. So in this case, if I have any kind of error, it is going to be made available as part of error object. If not, whatever the statements available here are going to be executed. Not if not, but this function is going to be executed regardless. So which means whether the connection has been failed or the connection is successful. So regardless, it is going to be executing this particular function. So I can just say if error, then I can just simply say something like console.log error, and I can say return. So if I come across any kind of connection related errors, it is just going to check if the error object is already in place. If so, just display that error and return without really requesting anything else. But if it is not error, which means I have successfully connected to the SQL Server, then I am going to use my request object in order to execute a SQL statement. So the simplest way is request.query, and as part of the query, the first thing is that I need to provide a select statement. So in this case, I am going to use select star from emp. So as you can see right from here, I have select and all the columns from the emp table. So that is the emp table. So I'm going to use the same thing here. And now this is going to give us a callback, as you can see. And this callback will have two parameters, error and record set. So as part of this one, If you are having any problems with this statement, or for some reason SQL Server is unable to execute this statement, you are going to have an error object made available to you. So if there is no error, and if this select statement is successful, it is going to return all the rows into this particular variable. So it could be called as data or record set or whatever you would like to call it as, but for now I just wanted to call it as record set. So again, if there is any problem, all I would like to say is that display that error to the console, and else I need to actually display the result back to the console itself. So I would like to say console.log display everything whatever I get through record set. So once I have both, I would like to say connection.close. So this is pretty important. So you open the connection the moment you say connect, and you need to close the connection whenever you are done with your request. So in this case, if you have an error, it is going to display the error, and at the same time you are still closing the connection. If there is no error, you are still getting the record set, and at the same time you are closing the connection. So this is pretty important. So if you don't close the connection, every time you open the connection, and it will always be open until and unless someone closes it, and you will be running out of the concurrent connections. So this is pretty important. You need to close it once you are done with your particular request. So this is just the function, and at the same time the same function is going to be executed as part of this one. So I just save everything, and hopefully this gets connected to our server and gives us the result. And there we go. So we have all the information right in place. So we have 1 2 3 4 5 6 rows, and those are nothing but the 6 rows available right here. So if I would like to modify any of those rows, for example, I go in here and the first one I make it as 10,000, and I close this node application and I execute it, and you can see I got 10,000 right here. Okay, so let me get back to my thing and make sure that it is switched back to my previous value. Switch to which 3,400. Okay, so now let us check if errors or anything are working fine. So let me give you emp222, which is not available. So let me try if this is working fine. So I execute it, and you can see there was an error, and it says invalid object name emp222, and it gives all the necessary information there. And that is how I can have the error to be defined and shown right in front of the console itself. And as I mentioned, whether or not you receive the error or the data, you are always closing the connection. But imagine the connection itself is unable to connect. So for example, I provide something like yeah. So this instance is not available. So just let us try to connect to that instance, and there you can see port for this one is not found on that particular server. So we got all that message too. So this is pretty much on how you can connect to SQL Server, but at the same time you can also do the same whatever you did here in a promise oriented manner. So which means when connection is successful, then do something. When query is done, then do something. If there is a problem, use a catch. So instead of using this method, I can also have another way to accomplish the same. So let us use another way. So I am going to say please connect first, and if connection is successful or unsuccessful, then is always successful. So you can see it returns a promise object. Then I can say something like this. So which means if connection is successful, then execute this particular function. If it is not successful, then I can use catch, which essentially gives me the error. So in this case, I can have an error in this fashion. So I can handle the error right here. So let us do this in separate lines so that we can easily understand on how the things are working. Okay, now you can see I have connection.connect. So if the connection is successful, then this then part will be executed, which means this callback function gets executed if the connection is successful. This callback gets executed if the connection is unsuccessful. So if it is unsuccessful, all I would like to use is console.log and just throw the error back to the user. So if the connection is successful, then I would like to have the request to be utilized. So I would like to have my request object which was created earlier. I just wanted to create it right there, and then I would like to use request.query, and I can say select star from emp, and even this can also be used with a promise object, like I can say then. So which means if it has been successfully executing that particular query, then execute my particular function. If not, then again I can have a catch, which gives an error object right there. So I can use both. So let me again make this in a readable fashion. So now what I'm saying is that if this query select star from emp is successful, then execute this function. If this is not successful, then execute this function. Again, as part of the error, all I would like to say is that just throw this one out. And once everything is done, in this case, as I got the result, I need to have that particular connection.result to be shown to the user. So in either case, once that particular query has been successfully executed and shown to the user, the data, we still need to close the connection. So that needs to be done right here and also right here. Make sure that you cannot use it here, as because this is asynchronous. So this whole execution is asynchronous, so which means it might take 2 seconds in order to get it executed. So while it may take 2 minutes or 2 seconds to execute, this will not wait. It will be going simply to the next statement, which essentially tries to close the connection. So you cannot do that. So now that we have another way, let us test if this is working fine. Okay, record set is not defined, as because it throws the record set right here. Okay, so let me check it. And now we have all the rows right there. So imagine now I am providing a or something, and just press start, and you can see it is giving EMPAA is not available. And similarly, if I provide something like AA here for the username, for which it will not be able to connect to the database, and now you can see connection error, and it says login failed for that particular username I provided. So we have everything in place. So you can use in either of these two approaches. So you can use the promise based programming methodology, or you can directly use the existing asynchronous way of how it is providing. So you can be just using the callback methods only without really depending on the promise object. But if you are working with the promise object, then you have the flexibility like then and catch, and similarly then and catch. So this is pretty much on how you can connect to SQL Server using mssql package as part of Node.Js. In my next video, we are going to see on how to have REST based operations using Node.js, that is pure Node.js, and all those REST operations will be working against SQL Server database itself.